Earlier on CBSN, political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns spoke to Meg Kinnard. She's a political reporter for the Associated Press covering the 2020 race from South Carolina. She asked her about Tom Steyer's chances in the state.
I don't know if we can characterize it necessarily as a threat, but Tom Steyer has absolutely been going after a lot of the same kinds of voters that Joe Biden has considered to be his main base here in South Carolina. We know all about the importance of the black vote here, and that's a constituency that Joe Biden has campaigned to very directly and has gotten a lot of support from. But Tom Steyer has focused his entire campaign on appealing to African American voters. He's been doing that for months here. It's been gradually building, and we've seen that support borne out in some recent surveys that we've had. So while he's not necessarily looking at a top finish for his campaign, if he does get significant support, we could end up seeing that manifest in somewhat of a smaller victory margin for Joe Biden.
And Biden is really depending on a big victory here to kind of save his campaign after those losses in the earlier states and boost him into Super Tuesday. From the folks that you've been talking to on the ground and what you've seen in your own reporting, is Biden poised for that kind of victory tonight?
Obviously, he certainly hopes so, but from the reporters that we've had out at the polls talking to voters today, a lot of them are coming back and saying that they did end up supporting Joe Biden today. Obviously, that's not scientific, it's very anecdotal, and we won't know till later, but it does seem that as we've seen the numbers of undecided voters going down in some of the data that we have gotten, Joe Biden's number has been going up. And so as races tighten, as we get into the final stretches, a lot of those people who maybe months ago had thought, I like Joe Biden, but I'm still open, seem to have maybe come back around full circle and decided to go to the polls and support him.
And what do you attribute Biden's standing here to? I mean, he's come here a lot. He has a long relationship with the state. His campaign has described this as his firewall from the beginning, really. From what you've seen, kind of how would you characterize why he has strong support here?
Those relationships that Joe Biden has with South Carolina go back decades. Not as much recently, but he has long talked about his relationship with Strom Thurmond, who was a longtime Republican senator here. Very recently, he has talked about his relationship with Fritz Hollings, who recently passed away. And before he even announced his campaign, Joe Biden was here for Senator Hollings' funeral. Those aside, though, the Bidens have long had a personal relationship with this place. They come here for vacation. People close to him basically say that he thinks of it as his second home. So when you have an affinity for a place like that, and even on the fringes of politics, develop these personal relationships that Joe Biden has, he knows mayors. He knows a lot of these state lawmakers. Obviously, he knows Jim Clyburn very well, and he got that big backing from him a few days ago. But it's a very multifaceted relationship that Joe Biden has here, and it's a place that now could be bringing him his very first ever primary victory.
Are there any other candidates that we may be underestimating in this state?
Hard to know, and I'm not a prognosticator, but I have talked to a lot of people in recent days who have said that they are interested in Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete Buttigieg is somebody who has been campaigning here, obviously consistently in South Carolina, but as has been very widely reported, has struggled in terms of gaining the African American support that's obviously crucial in places like this. But, we always go to these events and we say, well, what top 3 candidates are you considering, for these undecided voters? And his name has continued to come up. In part, that could be people turned off by the more progressive candidates in the race. It also could be people who are thinking, I think I'd like to support a moderate, maybe not Joe Biden necessarily, so I'm open to someone else, maybe Mayor Pete.
Because there is such a fast turnaround between now and Super Tuesday, by the time the polls close, several of these candidates will already have left South Carolina and onto these Super Tuesday states. How would you describe South Carolina's role in this primary process, given that Super Tuesday is just days away?
Sometimes the state's referred to as a bellwether for the other southern states. I'm not exactly sure if that rings true. That's a terrible analogy I didn't even mean to make. But South Carolina does have a makeup and composition that is similar to some other places that do vote after us. North Carolina is coming in, obviously a bigger place, but still, more diverse states like South Carolina is. And so a lot of these candidates, Joe Biden in particular, are looking to South Carolina to really have some oomph going into those other places that there are a lot of delegates at stake in all those states.
And Bernie Sanders is kind of the national frontrunner, competing in a lot of those states as well. Is South Carolina seen as the kind of the last stand to try to blunt any momentum that Bernie Sanders has going into those states?
That's what a lot of party officials and folks who would consider themselves part of the Democratic establishment are telling us, they're looking ahead. They're seeing all the delegates that are at stake in those big states like California, like Texas, places that Bernie Sanders has been shown to have a lot of support and has been drawing massive crowds. So they do see this as a place where they're not necessarily concerned about a Bernie Sanders victory, but if he were able to have large numbers come out of a place like South Carolina, where he was massively defeated in 2016 by Hillary Clinton, for him to have a better showing and for there to be such a much larger candidate field this go around than there was back then, they're kind of seeing that as, well, even if he doesn't win here, that still could give him some strength going into those big states.
And finally, what are you watching for tonight?
I am watching for turnout, first of all. That's something that we're always looking at to see, well, who's actually showing up, how many people. It's hard to get people jazzed in a primary sometimes, but, if we do see a lot of people turning out, there are different camps that are going to try to, before we have actual numbers, show that to their advantage. But also, really, I am very carefully watching Joe Biden's performance. As we've talked about, this is the place that he really needs to show strongly before he's heading into Super Tuesday. He says it's not necessarily make or break for him. Some people close to him have told me that it is. So I'm definitely watching him closely tonight.
Great. Well, we will be watching you and following all your reporting tonight. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.